Hello ladies and welcome back to my channel. My name is Aisha, aka Nurse Aisha. I'm a registered nurse here to spread awareness on preventative health and lifestyle choices for women. That is my focus so you can lead a healthier and more informed life. Welcome back to my platform. Today I'm here to address a very sensitive topic. As you all know by now, a month ago, on the 4th of February, there was a mass shooting in Örebro at campus Risbergska.
Det var skjutning, folk skjuter! Oh my god, det är skjutning!
This was the worst mass shooting in Swedish history. 10 people were killed, 6 were injured, and many left behind in grief, fear, and despair. 18 children lost a parent. Teachers lost their students. Wives lost their husbands, and husbands lost their wives. This horrible ordeal has left many of us wondering how something so horrible as this could happen in our free nation. I cannot find the words to comfort all of you that were part of this horrible ordeal, but I can assure you that we stand with you in solidarity, and together we shall overcome this. I have invited psychotherapist Hanna Wallensteen to talk a little bit about this, about what happened, how we can move forward, and how we can comfort each other during this horrible time. Please welcome Hanna Wallensteen. Hanna, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for answering my phone call to come here and discuss this very sensitive subject.
Yes, of course.
It happened to all of us.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Hanna, the first question I want to ask you about this is, where were you when you first had the news, and what were the thoughts that went in your head?
I was listening to the news on the radio, and I was traveling home from work, and and when I understood that there had been this shooting, my first thought was, I hope it's not a person of color. That was my very first thought. And it always is.
Yes.
When I hear about any kind of terrorist act, I hope it's not a person of color. I hope it's not a Muslim. I hope it's not a minority person.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because that makes it worse.
Well, because as I find it, what happens is, if it is such a person, the reactions will not be individualized. They will be seen as a representation for the entire group.
Yeah.
And
around the world.
Yeah, depending on where it has happened. And it will stigmatize an entire group. And because these actions are so horrendous,
yes.
Very naturally they will evoke so much anger and hate that the retaliation becomes so violent many times. So actually, when there's a person who belongs to a minority group who has committed a crime like this, the aftermaths can become so ugly for the rest of the group.
Yeah.
So that because I mean, it's a really strange thing that the next thing that happens is when I find out this is a person who seems to come from the majority, my reaction is actually relief, even though I at the same time took part of the information that the victims were mainly from minority groups, like immigrants, which, I mean, the natural reaction, I think, for me, should have been, that is so scary that we are now the possible victims. But I'm actually more relieved because I realize this will not look bad on us, as we will not look as persecutors.
Yeah, it will not be negative towards us as a minority group. Yeah.
But of course, then comes the fear and the fear of actually becoming victims instead. But that was my reaction. I think if I had myself been an immigrant, if I attending school, if I had myself had children who were taking part of this kind of adult education that was actually done at this school, then my reaction would probably have been more of fright and fear, and absolutely no relief, of course.
Because I was at work.
Yes. What was your...
I remember thinking the same thing first. And then as the news came in one by one, I remember one of the doctors said, when the news came that it was a university, I heard one of the doctors said, oh, well, at least it's not a daycare center. And that was also, okay, you know, there's a way that we process and we find maybe relief in something horrible happening. But there were so many thoughts, there's a fear, you know, and you mentioned something horrible happening and wishing or hoping that it's not one of us, so to say. But sometimes it's not even something horrible happening, because I remember not so long ago when COVID-19 came, we were victims, because I remember also working and being basically sorted out, because the first people that passed on were a lot of people from the Somali group. And I was mistaken, and you can probably be mistaken for a Somali. Not that, you know, we are excluding ourselves, but there was a point where I felt a target, or like people didn't want to be close to me.
Right.
Because
they were afraid of you.
Yeah, they thought I carried the virus.
Right.
And they didn't want to come close to me. And being in a position...
As a nurse, it
was kind of... So even if it's not as
challenging.
It was challenging. It was challenging times. And I remember we had to pitch in to actually give care, home care. And I was actually afraid that people would not open their doors.
Right.
So I asked not to go into home care because of that reason.
Yeah.
Because I had already seen it on the streets.
Yes.
People walking on the other side of the street.
But where you were at the ward where you were working,
I was at
were
the
there patients?
Clinic.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, patients, you know, came in and we had protocol.
Did you feel they were hesitant?
Not the ones that came in, because the people that were maybe mostly afraid stayed at home.
Right.
But some of them you could meet on the street, walking on the trains, because we didn't have a lockdown. So
right.
Yeah. So this, you know, you have to be. This goes as a minority. You think about this, and you think, you know, you don't want to be. You just highlighted in that moment of something not so pleasant.
No.
So the motive to this crime is still unknown.
Yes.
But the hate behind it speaks volumes.
Yes.
What do you think can bring someone to commit such a crime?
Well, I think and research also says the same thing, that it seems to be a combination of social, psychological, and biological factors combined with environmental and situational factors. So usually we see that it's a combination of several factors, and that will be very different from person to person and from case to case. And that's also why usually police and others will say we cannot 100% guarantee that these things will not happen. These are actually the hardest cases to avoid. So it can be, for instance, it can be something that is done in a psychosis, like a person who has lost contact with the world as we perceive it, maybe hearing imperative voices, maybe struggling with paranoia and things like that. It can also be that it is someone who is very isolated, all alone, who has sort of narrowed in on specific ideologies, extremist ideologies, maybe found role models, admires someone, maybe has been victim to indoctrination within an extremist group of some kind, has taken part of a lot of hate speech, and that way sort of has grown into a world where some people are dehumanized. And I think dehumanization is super important for a person to be able to really act on these ideas. I think it's important for a person to be able to do that, not to regard the people that you're doing this to as human beings, or people who have the same value as you yourself. You have to sort of look down at or see them as a threat. So if you're in fear, of course, then it's motivated to protect yourself. If you think this is something dangerous, and there can be so many different reasons. Also, there might be an influence of drugs or medicines. A lot of people who intentionally use violence also use different medications to sort of soften their feelings, their emotional, their empathetic system. So I think that's an important aspect. And then, of course, there is the access to weapons. A lot of people can have really harsh feelings and thoughts and fantasies and maybe even plans, but if they don't have access to weapons, then they can't act on it. And that can be enough to sort of slow them down, for them to get into a better place and decide not to. So we don't know how well planned was this, how much was an impulse, that we don't know. It seems like it was in some way planned because there were a lot of weapons involved, as I've heard from the news. I'm not part of the investigation in any way.
All right, so
but I'd like to say something also about the isolation thing, because that's something that's often brought up in these cases. Isolation is really interesting. So if we isolate, usually a lot of people who isolate also become depressed and feel hopelessness. But it's interesting to think about this isolation. Is it an isolation that is made voluntarily? Is it because I want to be alone? I like to be alone. I like myself. I like my own company. Or is this an isolation that is a result of being ostracized, not being included, being constantly rejected? Because for a lot of people, that is the experience. And if you have that many times over a lifetime, you get a cumulative stress, and it will all add up, and you will come to a point where you think, why should I even try to connect with people? And this can be both like socially, like from school, being perhaps teased or bullied or ostracized, but it can also be not being able to get a job, not being able to perform well in school. So that way, sort of falling out of social communities, and that way becoming isolated.
Yeah. That is a little bit of the picture that has been painted of the perpetrator. So it's alleged that it was very isolated. That person was very isolated. But this is very common here.
Yes.
I feel like this is something that is so common, especially in Europe, in Nordic countries. There's a lot of isolation. There's a lot of people that don't feel as though they're part of society and self-isolate.
Yes.
But is this a reason, though, to go all the way?
No, of course not. Of course not. And just like you said, there are so many people in our society who are isolated, who are alone, who are depressed, who feel hopeless, who are not able to access maybe the labor market, the housing or whatever. And still they do not do anything remotely like this.
Yeah.
So of course there is a free will and there is a lot of responsibility to put on a person who acts this way. Definitely.
Yes. So we can't take away the responsibility of
absolutely
someone.
Not. Absolutely not. But of course, we can't take away the responsibility. The person who has done this is the one who is responsible. Of course, no doubt. What we can do is to consider what can we do on different levels, like on a structural level, on a societal level, on an individual level. What can we do? Like how can we do something to make the labor market more open and more inclusive to more people? Can we do something to make sure that children have a better chance at performing and achieving in school? How do we work with peer groups, both with children and actually also at workplaces, for instance? How do we work with inclusion there? How do we make sure? How is our psychiatry built? How do we handle people who have been suffering from psychiatric diagnosis and who have been suffering, especially those who've been suffering for a long time? What do we know about their social network? How do we make sure that they don't become too alone? I mean, for anyone, and not only to prevent these kind of things from happening, but just to lessen the suffering.
Yeah.
What does it do to a human being to live day out and day in, not having anyone ask you, "Hi, how are you? What happened with whatever we were talking about the day before? How are things going? Did you enjoy your lunch?" I mean, whatever.
Yeah, in this country, just knocking at your neighbor's door or saying hi in the hallway, because I feel that is something that we fear. We don't want to know. We don't want to connect. I have so many neighbors. I don't know half of them. While in my African community, I mean, we are basically family with the neighbors. So we've kind of removed this natural way that human beings are born to be, that group connection.
And it's very interesting. I think like if we go to smaller villages in Sweden, then there we would find that kind of community feeling. You say hello and all that. But when we come to the bigger cities, we have a long tradition of not talking very much to each other. And I think partly this is due to the weather and the cold. Because I think in Sweden it's super interesting to see what happens somewhere around April, May, depending on where in Sweden you live, because we're such a long country that the heat comes slower for the northern parts. But when the heat in the spring, but when it gets a little bit warmer, usually it's like over a few days. It just changes from everybody walking like this, sitting like this on the desk,
head down,
and then suddenly everyone's like
receptive.
And then when we open our body language like this, I open my body language and you do that too, all of a sudden I see you.
Yeah.
Because I can't see you when I'm walking like this. But when I'm walking like this, I'll see you and I'll say, "Hi." And I get happy and you get happy because you get my smile. So that's
hopefully, because these days we're sitting like this.
Exactly. That's one more.
Media.
Yeah.
Phones.
Yeah, our smartphones. That's even one more obstacle to connection.
Problem. Yeah. And a lot of people live here.
Yes.
They don't live.
Yes, and when we live there in our smartphones, then it becomes extremely important. What information, what am I feeding? What am I eating? What am I feeding myself from my smartphone? Am I feeding myself with things that help me connect? Because some people really do connect on their smartphones.
But a lot of them disconnect.
But a lot of people disconnect. And some people do it consciously, and some people are not even aware that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we're being told that society failed this young man. He was denied financial aid for various reasons, but he's not the only one.
No.
Those benefits are hard to get,
Yes.
and you really have to fulfill the criteria to get them. Are we justifying this person's actions and coming up with excuses why this was done?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And once again, we don't know if society failed this man in particular, or if society had very good reasons to deny him the whatever benefits he was asking for. That I don't know. But what is interesting is this is a person who belongs to the majority, to the norm in Swedish society. He comes from a Swedish background. And as the media has been reporting about this case, there have been a lot of speculations about his individual situation. And what I think is interesting about this, I think that's perfectly reasonable. But what is, to me, frustrating is that many times when the persecutor is actually someone with a non-Swedish background, then that non-Swedish background gets highlighted, and the answers to why this was done are quickly sought among extremist ideas. There is something wrong about this person's values, or it may be something inherently wrong with this person, but not this individual, but with people from this part of the world. And so when there's a person with a non-Swedish background who has done something horrible, we tend, I think, we are quicker to explain it as something due to that person's background rather than individual factors.
Yes.
And this is the fundamental attribution error that is a social psychological concept, that we have a tendency to regard things that are positive, that we ourselves and people who belong to our in-group do, as something that comes from our inherent and personality factors. And things that are, but when it's someone from our out-group, we think it's something due to their group if they're doing something bad, and that if they occasionally do something good, we say, oh, that's a coincidence. Yeah, that must be, something situational, something environmental. Whereas if I do something bad, then we think it's situational and not something that comes from being part of this in-group.
Because when it comes to us minorities, what a lot of people complain about is that we're excluded until we've done something extremely good. And when that one person does something really, really good, then all of a sudden they are given, the honor of being a Swedish person.
Exactly.
But if I would do something, I would be considered the other. But if I did something good, then I am talked about as, the Swedish lady that did something, and never mention my background at times.
Right.
And that is very much a problem in Europe, basically, where the majority is is not us, basically.
I think that is exactly what, it's actually not just here in Europe or in Sweden, it's actually something that we do as human beings, and it's called the fundamental attribution error, that we have a tendency to regard the things that we do, that the people who belong to our in-group, as terrific, and ourselves as being terrific, and others as being a little less terrific.
Yeah.
And if someone from the out-group does something good, we see that as situational, environmental, coincidental. Whereas when we do something good, we think we're just, that's who we are, we're excellent.
Yeah.
And when we do something bad, we say, oh, I did something bad. That must have been circumstances or some bad coincidence. But when the others do something bad, we say, yeah, that's because they are them.
Yeah.
That's because they're the out group. They are bad. And then when one person comes into our in-group and they perform well, then we say, great, you're one of us.
Yeah.
But it's actually very conditional, because as soon as they do something bad, we say, oh, you're one of the out group.
Yeah.
And then you're back out in the cold. And I think that is exactly what happens to us in situations like this. This is why at least I get worried when someone commits a crime and I hear that it's someone who looks like me, because I worry about being regarded as the out group together with this person.
Yeah.
That this person will be seen as a representative of their, maybe their religion, maybe their country, maybe their community, maybe their entire continent.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's so sad. When this happened, we all followed the national protocol for catastrophe. The victims received aid. The Prime Minister addressed the nation. The King and Queen visited Örebro.
Yes.
The Swedish flag was hung on half-mast. And we had a moment of silence for the deceased. But how do we move on and heal after that?
Excellent question. It will be very interesting to see what actually happens. I know there are a lot of different ideas about whether or not whether they should have said more about the persecutor himself. But I think what is interesting is that we haven't gotten very much information, and fortunately, so far, there hasn't come another shooting. Sometimes these situations inspire others to do the same. But I think since they haven't said anything about an ideological background, there's no room for others to be inspired, or there is less room, which is excellent. And what I would hope for is that this situation can be, that we can continue to deal with this incident in a way where people are able to continue to feel empathy with those who have become victims of this. And I really do think that there are a lot of people for whom this has been an eye-opener, that, there is this much violence and aggression here in Sweden towards people who differ from ourselves, because I think a lot of people still perceive that that is what this is about, even though we haven't heard an ideological manifest or anything. But still, where this was done and in the way it was done, we still see that immigrants were targets here. And we already have the facts. We already have many studies that show that people who have immigrant backgrounds are actually more often victim to threats and violence than other groups. So, and I think for some people this was an awakening. Oh, this is for real. This is what it looks like. And this is a kind of threat that people are actually afraid of and trying to handle in their everyday life. And just for more people to understand that, I think that can be one thing that might help us change the way that we talk about each other's differences. I pray that it will be.
Yeah. I mean, the way that we've talked about it, I feel in my soul, I feel when I'm working, that we haven't really addressed it.
Right.
I don't think at my workplace we haven't really addressed it. I mean, I know that I have a friend that works at a school. They addressed it in a sense of how do we protect ourselves if this would happen. But I work in a big hospital, and I feel as though I've asked, I haven't seen it, my boss in an email addressing this. I haven't heard, I wasn't at the hospital the day of the moment of silence, but I feel that we are even afraid within us to have the discussion. Like me and my colleagues that are part of the majority group are afraid to talk to me about it. So there's a way that we are kind of sweeping it under the rug.
Yes, I think that's super interesting. And I wonder, I am not sure, but I wonder if it's that they are afraid of talking about it, or if it is that they don't think it's an issue. I mean, like when you belong to the majority, to the norm, you have the privilege of not thinking about these things.
Yeah.
And that's my perception, is that this is a non-issue to many people who belong to the majority or to the norm. They think, oh, that was a horrible, horrible situation, and they defy it, but they don't feel touched by it.
Yeah.
Whereas within among my friends who also have a non-Swedish background, this was not just another news.
No. We talked about it among us. A few people have talked to me.
Yeah.
Some have been very, very angry. Many have also talked about the way that you described it, that we don't really dig deeper and get to the core of this and what happened, and because this person was part of the majority. So, and the way media has handled it, very, very silent, which brings me to the next question. I feel as though the volume has been toned down in this.
Yes.
Because of the reason and the perpetrator being part of the majority.
Yeah.
Do you think that if it was if the person was part of a minority group, that it would be more amplified?
Yes, I think so. I think it would be, and at the same time, I'm happy it hasn't been this time. So what I would wish for is that it would not be amplified when it's someone who is part of a minority group, because I think it's a good thing not to give these kinds of
attacks.
I would say, attacks, and I would say terrorist acts, because I think what this does is it brings a lot of fear of things that could happen that we cannot predict. And I think that's like very much the signature of terror.
Yeah.
But anyway, I would prefer that the same kind of caution about going out saying this is what the reason was would be given in any case with any persecutor. That I would really wish for.
It's hard to predict that. It's hard because some people will just spit out something just because of their background and their ideologies and their beliefs of what might have happened. But in this case, everyone was very quiet and very respectful and very,
Which I think is probably also a mirroring of who gives us the news, who decides what way media is going to present things. So, it depends on the sender.
All right. So let's talk about the aftermath.
Yes.
What happens now? There's a lot of unanswered questions.
Yes.
Fear among us, minority groups, especially people of color, immigrants and refugees. how do we get past the fear, anxiety, and the possibility of us being a target?
Well, I would love to say, look, you don't have to worry. But I'm not going to do that. I think, but hear me out. But I think we have to be realistic. And we should not be naive. We need to understand that this is one part of living in this society and in this world, and it's nothing new. People of color have been victims of violence for centuries. What is new is that it is happening here in Sweden in this very blatant and super violent way. Also with the access to weapons, which is a huge difference. There were not as many weapons available and in use in the same way in Sweden just 10 years ago. So that's a big difference. We cannot let this win. And it's also important to understand that there are so many people who do not do this, who actually support, who work hard to include, who appreciate our presence here. And there is in this kind of actions that this man did, there is also the idea that I will scare you. You should not feel safe. You should know that this can happen to anyone, anywhere, when you least expect it. So if I dig into that fear, then if I give in to that, then in a way, he has succeeded. And I think it's not necessary to give in to that fear, because this is still, and that is important, this is still very unusual. It's easy to get the feeling that this can happen anywhere, anytime. Yes, it can. But does it happen all the time? No, it doesn't. It doesn't. It's not happening all the time. Do you think it's happening all the time here in Sweden?
Of course not. But I still feel a bit afraid. I feel maybe it's because it wasn't long ago. We're still in February. And I just feel like, to me, it's got to a point where I'm questioning people. I'm kind of looking at people in a certain way and looking over my shoulder all the time, thinking, because it's unnerving. It is. And it hasn't, I've been here for over 30 years, and this is the most I've felt so afraid of being alone in the streets. Maybe it's dark in this country, have to walk home alone from the bus, and I see there's a lot of people around me that you get suspicious of people's intentions, being in a setting where there's many of us. I feel like that is also something that is very unusual for me to feel. Discomfort, and fear. It's unnerving.
It is, and at the same time, I think there's a choice for all of us to make here. Am I going to give in to that? Am I going to believe the narrative that anyone, anywhere, all the time, I need to be vigilant and careful? Am I going to give in to that? Or am I going to go for the other choice? Everywhere, all the time, there are people there who want to help, who want to see us, who want to meet us, who want to say hi in the street, who want to have that knock on the door. This is a choice that we have to make. And I have to ask myself, what will my life be like if I walk around like this, or if I walk around like this? Of course, there is a risk, but actually, once again, if I walk around like this, the risk is much higher that someone will feel like, oh, she looks aggressive, rather than walking around like this. That's a real challenge for us, but I think it's super important because there is also, I mean, it's not only the risk that a crime like the shooting could happen. There are also a lot of people who are afraid of gang criminality, gang violence. Like, what if I happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time? A lot of people avoid going to certain areas. A lot of people when they go to certain areas, think that I'll be shot any second. Which is that's not true. That's not realistic. But it's a narrative, it's a picture, it's an idea that is sort of planted also in us. And I think we really need to be cautious of that. No, I should not probably walk all alone in a street where I feel like this feels dangerous. No, if I have that intuition, of course, go somewhere else. But so let's not be naive, let's not be stupid. If someone comes up to me pointing a gun, of course I'm not going to be like, yeah, you want to shoot me? No, of course not. That's not what I'm saying. But we also have to start seeing and start reminding ourselves and each other about all the good things, all the community, all the help, all the actual invitations that are given to us. There are still schools that are open. There is still a lot of culture that is being exchanged, that is including. I mean, there are so many things that we seem to forget. And I think what has been beautiful about what happened in Örebro is that the entire Örebro has been coming together.
Has been united.
They have been united.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, and the city has decided to try to, and I think that's also, we follow the protocol, the national protocol, and let's continue to do that. Let's continue to think about how do we express ourselves when we talk about each other? What pictures are we painting about each other? What is the typical Swede? Is that person, that one person who was mad and angry and who did this, is that a typical Swede? No, it's not. What is a typical Swede? Well, it's you, it's me, it's a lot of other people. It's the king and the queen and all of us.
Yeah, thank you for addressing that. That is very important. So, apart from the fear and the anxiety and all of this, obviously that is affecting our mental health. How do we get around this? How can we get help with this? How, if we feel afraid and feel a lot of anxiety around this issue, because many of us do, except, besides from anger, there's so many feelings that need to be addressed. How do we do that? Should we do that by ourselves? Should we do that in a group session? How do you feel? How can we go?
Yeah, it's a good question and important. I think, first of all, I mean, the grief that we feel is normal. We should feel grief. We should feel sad. That would be normal. So I think that's also something for us, just like a symptom of the times that we're living in. It's as if we always should be happy, and but how can we be that when horrible things happen and when we lose people and when we see people suffering? Of course, that should make us sad and should make us worried and should make us angry when we see injustices, because that's what's going to drive us to take action to change. So that's something. But the same goes for fear. That can also be something that drives us to be cautious in situations where we should be cautious. What we should look out for is when we get stuck, when it gets frozen, when we can't get out of our mind, for instance, when we worry in situations where there's really no need to worry. When we hear people telling us, you really don't have to worry about this, that's a sign. Or if we get not only sad but depressed, that is, we go into a mood that nothing is good, nothing will ever get better. We start getting close to hopelessness, and if it continues for more than 2 weeks, like in the first phase, like when we've lost someone, and especially if we lost someone who is close to us, then that's different. Then we need usually a long time of mourning. But when we get depressed, that perhaps we notice that it's too much to get out of bed, or nothing of the things that I usually feel happy about makes me happy now. Hopelessness and just continuous sadness. That's something to notice. And then we might need to get like real help, like professional help. But to avoid that, to prevent that, what we need is to get together, to activate ourselves, to be together with other people, share our experiences, share our thoughts. And we're different. Some of us feel, okay, if I just get to go out into the woods, have some time alone, feel the air, that's what's going to help me. Or maybe I need to go to church or my mosque or whatever. Maybe I need time to pray or to meditate. Because that is what's going to help me.
That's something that brought a lot of people together during that time. There was a lot of churches open, because a lot of these people were part of the churches, and that brought people together.
Yes. And the mosques were open too, and I mean, so that's really important to find those for some of us, the spiritual healing is really helpful. For some of us, just spending time together with close friends or family. Sometimes we need time to talk to each other, to cry together. Sometimes what we need the most is to just enjoy life. I'm still here. I'm still alive. I have those who I care about around me. For some of us, a situation like this will remind us of earlier traumas or losses. And I think it's good if that is what happens, that we also try to create space for that as well. That we don't try to repress that, but that we welcome it and say, okay, so this is also time for me to remember others that have meant a lot to me and whom I miss. But if this becomes something that triggers earlier trauma in the way that maybe I get unwanted flashbacks, I start worrying, I get startled in not so motivated situations, then that might be a sign of PTSD, a post-traumatic stress disorder that we need to get professional help with.
Yeah, because a lot of people, especially in minority groups, people that came here as refugees, come from war countries and come from places where they had to come to this country to actually take refuge from this. And now this has been triggered where in their country where they're supposed to feel safe.
Yes, and that is super important. If we have those experiences and they are triggered in a way that we feel, I can't really handle this, I can't sleep now, or and we're not and it doesn't pass. Sometimes those things happen and they stay for a few days. That's fine. But if it doesn't pass within 2 weeks, I would say, then we should, or if it becomes very dramatic for us, so that we feel like I'm almost losing contact with reality, then we should definitely go try to get professional help as quickly as possible, because something that is really good to know is that when we look at intergenerational trauma, that is trauma that is passed on from one generation to the next, one of the main what we can see, one of the main correlates is that if a parent is suffering from PTSD, the risk is much higher that their children will suffer from some kind of mental ill health. It's not it doesn't have to become that way, but the risks are higher.
Yeah.
So taking responsibility for our own health is also taking responsibility for our closest health.
Yeah. So what triggered a lot of us is that the place where this happened, it happened at Campus Risbergska, and this was a place where people came together, or they sought education to integrate into the country, into the society, to learn the Swedish language, to learn the Swedish values and culture. But even that was not good enough. And they became a target of exclusion. Why? I mean, how are we supposed to receive that? Because we're doing everything that we're supposed to be doing. These people were doing what they were supposed to be doing.
Yes.
And they became victims of this.
I think, well, of course, first of all, we don't know if it was because they are trying to do everything to fit into society and to be part of society and to be to bring something to the Swedish nation. We don't know if the reason for this horrible act was that they were actually doing something right or trying to do something right. It can be something else. We don't know. Maybe this person was left by a girlfriend. We don't know. So that's one thing. But still, it still triggers the thought. And I think it's so important that we remember that is one way of understanding this. But and that was may have been the persecutors' way of understanding. But most Swedes, you and I, we are Swedes, and so many majority Swedes perceive that as exactly the right thing to do. Perceive these people as good people, lovable people, people who we want to include, people who we see will contribute to society. So let's not make this incident be the story. Maybe this was actually the exception. Or not maybe, I think this is the exception. Most people actually perceive people attending school, trying to bring something back to society as people who are doing great things that everyone is trying to do.
So this shouldn't be our story. And this shouldn't be our story.
No, the story of the shooting. No. The mass shooting, that should be the exception, and that is the exception. That is still the exception, and let's make it the exception. Let's not make that the story. It is part of the story, but it's a small part of the story. There is a much bigger story and a much bigger picture to paint.
This doesn't define this nation.
No, this does not define this nation. This does not define the typical Swede. This does not define the typical immigrant. Typical immigrants do not typically get shot. That's not true. That's not even true. Typical Swedes do not mass shoot. That's not true. They do not mass shoot. Most Swedes, immigrants, non-immigrants, whomever, are ordinary, nice people who go to work, pay their taxes, take care of their children and their elderlies, and just want to live a life in peace.
That's true.
And that's really important to remember, especially in these times when we're flooded by information about violence and threats. It's injustice. It's very important to remember that there are so many other things going on at the same time. And that is really the way that we can move forward, and that we can find our own resilience and wish to continue to work for change. Because otherwise, if we let that other narrative dominate, we will feel defeated, and we will feel like, why should I make an effort? There's no use, there's nothing, and then we fall into that hopelessness. And that's when we go into isolation, segregation, polarization, And that is exactly what is dividing us at this moment. So we have to turn that around, start looking at each other, seeing each other, saying, hi, how are you doing? Would you like to come over? Or, no, I don't have time to come over, but I'm happy to see you. Yeah.
Good. So, lastly, I want to talk about belonging.
Yes.
So, you have been here for basically all your life. You came here as you were adopted into this country to a Swedish family in the 1970s. I myself came here as an immigrant with my family over 30 years ago. And I should speak for myself, I feel like I belong in this country.
So do I.
I feel a sense of belonging. I feel like I am a Swedish person.
Yes.
In part of the minority in Sweden, but I am part of this society. And no one can take that away from me, the way that I feel, because I grew up here. I became a woman in this country. I had my first kiss in this country. I did a lot of my first things in this country. I was brought up in a Swedish family. So I feel like I belong. I feel part of this. That doesn't take away my other, because I'm also an African woman. So, and that is the story that I feel, the duo story is my story. But that doesn't make me less of a Swedish person. But when it comes to belonging, who gets to decide where you belong? Whose decision is what you feel, or belonging?
Oh, that's such a good question. And I love the way you describe your sense of belonging. And I think that's really the only person who can decide where you belong. That's you.
Yeah.
We're the only ones who know, what do I feel like? But I think it's also lovely to hear you talk about this, because you're not saying that it's exclusive. You don't have to decide. Like sometimes people say, so what are you? Are you this or that?
Yeah.
If you see a football game, who do you root for? As if we have to decide. But many of us have so many different parts. And we can belong both here and there and also elsewhere. And that, I think, is important, that we can hold that and that we can integrate that and that we can understand that is actually a richness. And I think the sense of belonging, that it's so fundamental. And I think it's also interesting that when we feel as we're being excluded from society, if we come as immigrants, I think there's also what's going on now in many parts, both here and in other countries, is a sense that, but I who belong to the norm and to the majority, I am seeing that there are so many people who don't belong to the norm or the majority, who perhaps have come as immigrants or have some kind of immigrant background. And they're becoming so many that I feel like a minority, although I'm still part of the norm. And then maybe I feel like I don't belong any longer. And I think that sense is really dangerous. So I think it's a challenge for us to make sure that everybody feel included. Yeah. And for those of us who have for a long time belonged to the minorities, seeing that people who belong to the norm and the majority, that they feel excluded and that they don't feel like they belong the very same way they used to, that's kind of challenging, because I can see that there are so many privileges still that they have, those who belong to the norm. But I think we also have to start taking that into our mind, that the sense of belonging is very personal.
Yeah, and I feel like just because I feel like I belong doesn't make you less part of the society. I mean, I'm here, and some of us, many of us, don't have the other.
Right.
Some are even born in this country and don't have anything else. They're children of immigrants.
Exactly.
They're here to stay, and they were born here.
Yes.
So it's really important that everybody has a sense of belonging to their as part of their story.
Yes.
And how that is narrative, how that came along is, you know, is personal, and it's up to them to decide if.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. And I think it's the big change will come when the majority perceives us as all of us as part of the nation.
Yeah.
Like
So it's
both,
not
both
divided.
those who've lived here for generations and those who are more of newcomers. When all of us are regarded as belonging, well then that will build a really strong nation.
Yeah.
That's my point of view.
Thank you so much, Hanna, for coming here to address this issue. And I want to say that in all of this, I feel that this hopefully will make us stronger together as a nation, and try to work towards this not dividing us. I feel like it's important to talk about. And I think you have addressed all of that. Everything that I felt was important in this conversation, we have talked about. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you everybody for watching, and I hope to see you in my next video. But before that, I want you to go into the comment section and talk about your feelings regarding this situation and what you feel could have been done better, or what we can do after this. How are you receiving this? How have you received this? And what do you feel is important to highlight in this story? Thank you so much.